Germany's homelessness crisis is exploding, and the scariest part is how easy it is to miss. When people don't see a dramatic street scene, they assume nothing serious is happening, but that assumption is exactly what keeps the pipeline growing. What makes this frightening is how quickly the fall can happen when several small frictions stack together. From the outside, it looks like someone failed, but from the inside, it looks like a system doing what it is built to do. Let's break the pipeline open because there is a point where the paperwork stops matching your real life, and that is where the system starts closing doors without warning. The number that shocks people. A lot of people hear a headline like this and think it must be exaggerated because the street scene does not match the scale. And that is where the confusion starts. This crisis is not only what you can see outside. A big part of it sits in temporary places, short stays, and systems most people never touch until they suddenly have to. One major count comes from the National Statistical Office. It focuses on people who are placed in some form of temporary accommodation through local authorities and support systems. In that data set, the count is roughly 178,100 in early 2022. In official terms, it is produced by the Federal Statistical Office of Germany, the Statistisches Bundesamt. It rises to roughly 372,000 in early 2023. Then it rises again to roughly 439,500 in early 2024. Those are not small changes. That is why the word explodes appears in headlines. But it also creates a trap. If you hear a single number without context, you either panic or you dismiss it. Neither reaction helps you understand what is actually happening. Now add the second number. A federal homelessness report uses a wider frame and estimates a total of around 531,601 people, once you include people without any accommodation and people living in hidden, unstable arrangements. So yes, the numbers are large and the jump is real. The next problem is why the public still feels unsure. Why so many people say, "I do not see that," while others say it is everywhere. That gap starts with one simple issue. People use one word for different realities. What homeless means here? Most public debates treat homelessness as one scene. The system splits it into stages, and each stage has different visibility and different measurement. First, there is the group that is accommodated. That means someone is staying in emergency or temporary accommodation arranged through a municipality or a support network. It can be an emergency shelter, a shared accommodation site, a temporary unit, or another placement. It is a roof, but it is not stable housing with a normal rental contract you control. Second, there is the group that has no accommodation at all. This includes people sleeping outside, in transport hubs, in cars, or in places where they try not to be noticed. This is the group most people picture, and it is also the group that is hardest to count because movement is part of survival. Third, there is the group most people miss, hidden homelessness. That is when someone is staying with friends or family, rotating between couches, or using informal arrangements that can end at any time. From the outside, it can look like they are staying somewhere, but they have no secure place of their own. This is why one statistic can feel shocking and another can feel invisible. One is measuring the accommodated group, another tries to estimate all three. The crisis is not one scene. It is a pipeline with different stages, and once you see the stages, the next question becomes unavoidable. Why did the accommodated numbers jump so fast in just a few years? A fast rise usually comes from stacked pressures, plus changes in what gets recorded. If you want clear, grounded updates on what is changing and why it matters, subscribe. This channel tracks the numbers, the rules, and the real-life effects, not just the headlines. Why the count jumps so fast? When people hear a steep rise, they look for one dramatic cause. In reality, steep rises often come from several pressures stacking up, plus changes in reporting. One part is improved reporting. When a national statistic is still relatively new, some municipalities report more completely over time. That does not mean the earlier situation was fine. It means the system is getting better at seeing what was already there. Another part is that more people are being placed into temporary accommodation because the housing market is tighter. When rents rise, when competition increases, and when the margin for error shrinks, more people fall into the temporary system instead of finding a private rental quickly. There is also a pressure that many people notice in daily life: large-scale displacement and migration that flows into municipal accommodation systems. In the recent counts, a significant share of those accommodated were people with Ukrainian nationality. You do not have to turn this into a political argument to understand the capacity impact. More people need placements, and the temporary system carries that load. Here is the grounded point. Even if part of the jump is better counting, and part of it is new groups being included, the daily effect is still the same. Facilities are fuller, staff are stretched, wait lists are longer, and the system has less slack for the person who is one shock away from losing housing. So the question is not whether the number is real. The question is what the number represents in lived terms, because accommodated can still mean instability, and instability is where things start to break. Accommodation is not housing. Many people imagine temporary accommodation as a short stop on the way back to normal life. Sometimes it is, but for many, it becomes a long limbo. The difference is control. In stable housing, you have a lease, privacy, and predictable rules. In temporary accommodation, you often have a placement letter, a key card, and conditions that can change. You may share a room, you may share facilities, you may be moved, you may have rules about hours, visitors, and belongings. Even when staff are doing their best, overcrowding turns small problems into big stress. Noise becomes constant, sleep becomes broken, hygiene becomes harder. You can keep working, but it becomes harder to show up calm and focused. You can keep parenting, but it becomes harder to keep routines for children. Moves are common. Sometimes the placement is short. Sometimes the local authority has to reshuffle people across sites. Sometimes a facility closes or changes use. Each move breaks routine, and routine is what keeps people stable. This is also where neighborhoods see symptoms. People waiting outside, smoking outside, looking exhausted, looking stressed. Residents sometimes read that as a character issue. Often it is a stability issue. When you live in limbo, the smallest thing can feel like a threat. So the crisis is not only the street, it is a growing population living in not yet housed status. And once you live in that status, one missing document can trigger a new fall because modern life assumes you have an address. The address problem that breaks everything. Most people think an address is just where you get mail. In reality, an address is how the system knows where to place you, how to contact you, and how to hold you to deadlines. Without a stable address, letters go missing. Deadlines get missed. Appointments are missed. A missed appointment can look like laziness from the outside, but it is often a logistics failure from the inside. You may be moving. You may not have a safe place to store papers. You may not get messages in time. Then there is the problem of which office. Many services are organized by district. If your situation is unstable, you can spend hours being redirected because the system needs you to fit into a box. A person can do everything right and still hear you are not in the correct area, or you need a document you do not have. This is where the job support office becomes central. The job center and related benefit systems can keep someone afloat, but only if the person can keep up with the paperwork. When living conditions are unstable, keeping up becomes harder. One missed letter can lead to a cut. A cut leads to a new crisis. That new crisis makes it even harder to return to stability. Most people have felt rental competition. The difference is what happens when you compete from a weak position. The rental market gate. Many landlords and agencies ask for proof of income, proof of recent rent payments, and a credit report. A common credit report in this country is tied to the Protection Association for General Credit Protection, called the Schutzgemeinschaft für allgemeine Kreditsicherung. If your record has a negative entry, or if it looks unclear, you can be filtered out fast, even if you are working, even if you can pay today. Then there is the deposit. A deposit is commonly 2 or 3 months of rent, plus the first month quickly. People in instability rarely build savings. They spend on survival, transport, storage, temporary stays, replacing lost items, keeping a phone active. So even if someone could pay rent, they may not have the deposit at the exact moment it is demanded. There is also a quiet gate, presentation, and speed. If you reply late because your phone is unstable, you drop down the list. If your documents are messy because you have no safe storage, you drop down the list. If you show up exhausted because your sleep is broken, you drop down the list. Not always because someone is cruel, but because the competition allows tiny frictions to decide. That is why the crisis can grow even when some units exist. The market does not allocate by need, it allocates by smoothness. And as more people are pushed into instability, fewer people can look smooth. This is where another reality appears. Many people assume homelessness means unemployment, but a large part of this pipeline includes people who are working quietly and trying not to be noticed. Working and homeless at the same time. A lot of people still believe a simple rule. If you work, you are safe. That rule is weaker than it used to be, and the people living through it often try hard to hide it. Many people keep jobs while staying in temporary accommodation. They wake early, commute long, and try to stay presentable. They keep documents in folders. They keep clothes in bags. They charge phones wherever they can. They avoid telling coworkers because they fear stigma, and they fear losing the job that is keeping them connected to normal life. But working while homeless has hidden costs. Sleep is unstable. Privacy is limited. You are always managing small logistics that other people never think about. Where do you store your work clothes? Where do you wash? Where do you keep a laptop safe? How do you arrive on time when you have to move placements? Over time, the strain shows up as mistakes, lateness, missed shifts, or mental exhaustion. Employers do not see the housing problem. They see performance. And when performance drops, people lose the job. Losing the job closes the last door that might have led back to stable housing. This is also why the public underestimates the scale. Many people in this pipeline do not look like a stereotype. They look like tired workers. They ride the same trains. They stand in the same queues. They keep going until they cannot. If someone is rotating between couches, it can look like they are fine, right until the day they are not. The hidden homelessness layer. This layer is easy to miss because it can look like normal life from the outside. Someone stays with a friend for a while. Someone stays with family until it is sorted. A relationship ends and one person rotates between spare rooms. A young person avoids shelters and stays wherever they can. This is still homelessness, but it is quieter. There is no contract. There is no security. The host can end it at any time, and the guest often avoids making trouble because they know they have no rights in that situation. Hidden homelessness is also hard to count. Many people do not register it. They do not want the host to get into trouble with a landlord. They do not want social services to ask questions. They also fear getting stuck in a system of placements they cannot control. So they keep it informal, even when it is stressful. This is where the worse than you think part becomes real. The national report estimates around 60,435 people are in this hidden category. In real life, it is likely higher because invisibility is the point. Many people do not want to be measured. Hidden homelessness acts like a buffer. As long as couches exist, fewer people appear outside. When the buffer is full, the fall becomes faster. And in tight housing markets, the buffer fills quickly because hosts are also under pressure. If you only look for a fixed spot, you will miss how street homelessness often works here. The outside group that moves. People often ask, if the numbers are so high, why do I not see it everywhere? One answer is simple. Many people are actively trying not to be seen. Living outside is not static, it is movement. People choose places that feel safer. They avoid places with constant complaints. They learn when cleaning crews arrive. They learn when staff at stations start pushing people out. They rotate because staying in one spot becomes a risk. This is also why counting is hard. If you count on one night, you miss people who sleep late and leave early. If you count in the obvious areas, you miss people who hide in less obvious areas. Some people also avoid outreach because contact can feel risky. They fear being moved along. They fear attention. They fear consequences they do not fully understand. That does not mean help is bad. It means trust is fragile when your life is fragile. If you have been moved along before, you expect it again, so you keep moving first. The report estimates around 47,270 people were without any accommodation. Treat that as a minimum, not a full capture of reality. It is a baseline that tells you the outside group exists at scale, even if it is spread out and hard to see. When a housing market becomes a contest, the people with the least stability lose first. The big city pressure cooker. You do not need a theory to feel this. You can feel it in the number of applicants at viewings, in how fast listings disappear, and in how many people are searching at the same time. In some places, pressure is shaped by long-term demand, limited affordable supply, and years of competition. It also shows up in long commutes, in shared flats becoming overcrowded, and in people delaying moving out because they cannot afford to. After those patterns settle in, the market becomes a constant fight. In Berlin, this has been a daily topic for years, and it has a simple outcome. More people live closer to the edge. In other places, the squeeze is more about cost at almost every income level. You see it in how quickly someone can fall after a breakup, a job loss, or a health shock, because there is no cheap landing zone. Even people with steady salaries can feel one bill away from trouble. In Munich, the margin for error is smaller, and that changes who ends up in temporary placements. Then there is the transit and port city dynamic. Movement is constant, and services carry a heavy load. Public space becomes contested quickly, and the response often focuses on managing where people can be, not on creating housing exits. In Hamburg, you can feel that tension around central areas, especially when visibility rises. These examples do not explain every case, but they show the same pattern. When the market tightens, the pipeline gets wider. More people enter temporary accommodation. More people get stuck in hidden homelessness, and the outside group becomes harder to ignore. When leaders want quick results, the system often chooses control before stability. Visibility management versus real exits. When a city is under stress, leaders want to show action. The easiest action is to manage what is visible. That can mean stronger pressure in transport hubs, more policing of certain areas, or rules that make public space less usable for people who have nowhere else to go. It can also mean expanding emergency accommodation without expanding exits. More beds, more temporary sites, more rotations, and longer waiting. On paper, that looks like support. In practice, it can become a waiting room with no door out. This creates two kinds of frustration. Residents want predictability and less disorder. When people are moved along, it can look like progress, but the situation often reappears elsewhere. The overall number does not fall, it just shifts. People inside the system feel a different kind of frustration. They might get a placement, but they still do not have housing. They are told to wait, but the waiting happens while they are unstable. Their job suffers, their health suffers, their ability to keep documents and routines suffers. The temporary solution can quietly increase long-term damage. This is why the headline matters. The crisis explodes, not only because more people are visible, but because the temporary load becomes so large that the system starts cycling people rather than stabilizing them. So the real question is, what changes the math for the whole pipeline? The answer is boring, but it is the only answer that works at scale. The boring fix that changes the math. Solutions that reduce homelessness do not look dramatic. They look organized. They look like people moving out of limbo before they break. First, prevention. Many people fall after one shock: rent arrears, job loss, illness, separation, a repair bill. Fast help can stop the fall. Slow help often arrives after the person is already in the pipeline. Second, real pathways from temporary accommodation into stable housing. That means more social housing, more supported housing, and more practical agreements that allow people to rent even if their file is not perfect. If the system demands perfection from people who are unstable, it creates permanent limbo. Third, cut the paperwork trap. If the job center, the municipality, and housing services are not coordinated, people lose support for procedural reasons. That is a system failure. The faster the system can keep someone stable on paper, the more likely they can stay stable in real life. Fourth, supply. This is the slow part, and it is political. But without more affordable housing supply, the market keeps pushing people into homelessness faster than services can pull them out. You can improve shelters and outreach and still lose if the housing side never catches up. Now here is the part that is hard to say out loud. Goals and plans only matter if these pieces scale. Otherwise, the public sees rising numbers and starts to assume nothing works. So, when you hear worse than you think, remember what it includes: accommodated homelessness, hidden homelessness, and the outside group that moves. The crisis is not one scene, it is a pipeline, and the numbers show the pipeline is getting wider. That is why this keeps escalating. If you only look for people sleeping outside, you will miss most of the crisis. A large share of homelessness now sits in temporary accommodation and in hidden situations that never show up in street scenes. That is why the public keeps arguing about numbers and still feels pressure rising. The important part is not which label wins. The important part is whether the pipeline has real exits. Prevention that arrives before a fall becomes permanent. Faster paths from temporary placements into stable housing, and enough affordable supply so the market stops filtering people out. So tell me this, in your area, what breaks first? Rent, deposits, credit screening, or paperwork? Comment and subscribe for grounded breakdowns like this.